The alarm was still blaring when I cleared out my desk. Some poor kid had tripped the Halon system test button again, something I'd warned Craig about fixing 6 months ago. The emergency lights flickered as I walked past the control panel, my name still listed on the override. I paused, considered saying something. Then I remembered the look on Craig's face when he told me I was being let go. Not regret, not concern. Just that greasy, performative grin he wore when showing off a new golf putter or bragging about underbidding a safety consultant. Your safety role is first to go, he'd said, like I was a janitor asking for a raise instead of the person who kept OSHA inspectors from camping on our front lawn. 12 years of quiet fixes, preventive maintenance, and nightly walkthroughs, all tossed aside like an expired fire extinguisher. I didn't argue, I didn't ask questions. HR handed me a folder labeled exit packet, and Craig watched like he was waiting for applause. My badge still worked when I swiped out. Nobody had bothered to deactivate it yet. Hey, quick pause here. If you're listening and you haven't already subscribed or liked the video, it means the world to us. We put a lot into bringing these stories to life, and your support genuinely keeps this going. Thank you. Back in the parking lot, the October wind cut through my coat as I dropped the badge in my tote. I could still smell the citrusy floor cleaner from the lunchroom hallway, another product I'd switched last year to reduce skin exposure complaints. No one had thanked me for that either. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the sudden hollowness of it all. A building I'd protected through 6 failed audits and 3 chemical expansions, and now I was just gone. Craig hadn't even waited until the end of the quarter. He called it agile cost optimization, said a compliance audit wasn't due for another 6 months, and in the meantime, everyone should just use common sense. He said it in front of Tina from finance, who nodded like she understood what that even meant on a catwalk covered in graphite dust. He never understood that safety isn't about the stuff you see. It's about the things that never happen. No accidents, no fires, no headlines. I made it all look too easy. That was my real mistake. And Craig, in his denim button-down and gold cufflinks, had just put a dollar value on my absence. I drove home in silence, past the railroad tracks where we'd nearly lost a contractor to a blind reversing zone 3 years back. I'd fixed that too, flag system, mirror install, new SOP, all within budget. HR hadn't even asked me to write a transition memo. Craig was convinced my role was more red tape than real work, but the way he'd said it, the casual brush-off, the pride in the savings, it kept echoing. No more safety overhead, streamlined and lean. I'd heard those words before, usually right before someone loses a hand. I unpacked my work tote that night and saw the last inspection binder still inside. My initials, date stamped, next to every checklist. I sat at the kitchen table flipping through it. Page 12, flammable storage log. Page 28, ladder inspection rotation. All of it clean, all of it mine. And then the question hit me. If I was out, who was in? That's when the quiet turned into something else. Something heavier. Not rage, not even revenge, just this weight in my chest that said, he doesn't get to walk away from this like it's just numbers on a spreadsheet. Because when someone erases the one person who knew where the gas lines crossed the power cables, they better pray their luck holds out. And Craig Halden, he just bet the whole damn company that it would. I was on my second cup of coffee and halfway through a LinkedIn job post about rockstar safety ninjas when my phone rang. It was Kent from Ellison and Price, one of the independent safety inspectors who used to audit Halden Steelworks twice a year. Hey, weird question, he started. Your name's still on all the site permits. You still the safety officer? I let out a short, bitter laugh that surprised even me. Nope. Craig decided safety was a luxury item. There was an awkward pause. Right, well, the permit filings still route through your credentials, so unless he's updated the back-end forms, which, knowing him, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew. Craig never touched admin systems unless there was a press release involved. I thanked Kent, hung up, and just sat there for a second, staring at the steam rising from my mug. My name was still on the permits? After a full week? I opened my laptop and pulled up the state's workplace registry site. Sure enough, under designated safety contact, it still said, Rebecca L. Marrow. That was me. Not a placeholder, not a ghost record. Active, certified, and very much attached to every legal safety filing Halden Steelworks had made in the last 2 years. Then it got worse. I checked the OSHA contact listing. Same. I checked Northern Underwriters, our liability insurance provider. Same. Every system that mattered still had me down as the person responsible for compliance, risk mitigation, and emergency response protocols. And Craig? He hadn't hired anyone new, no press release, no onboarding notice, nothing on the plant staff update feed, which, by the way, I still had bookmarked out of habit. There was no new officer, no interim manager, just a vacuum where the most critical role in a hazardous plant operation used to be. My fingers were already moving before I fully understood what I was doing. I opened my old work archive, logged into the document vault, which, miraculously, Craig hadn't locked me out of yet, and pulled the last communication string between him and our insurance rep. It was all there. He'd proudly attached a bullet point memo with the subject line, "Streamlining safety equals saving dollars." The last line, bolded, read, "We've eliminated our formal safety officer role. No more red tape, no more officer." The timestamp? 2 days after I'd been let go. The recipient? Northern Underwriters, Attention, Risk Adjustment Division. I just stared at the screen. He didn't just fire me, he announced it to the people holding the keys to his liability protection like it was a badge of honor. No replacement, no transitional plan, no advisory coverage, just a blank space and a brag. My heart wasn't racing, my palms weren't sweating. But I felt this low, dense pulse start building behind my eyes, a kind of pressure that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with disbelief. He hadn't just kicked the ladder out, he'd lit it on fire and waved the match in front of the sprinkler system. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so grotesquely real. All those years I spent documenting every inspection, building every emergency protocol from scratch, lobbying for safer racking systems and smarter evacuation signage. And now the guy was out here telling underwriters that safety was non-essential. I pulled up our historical claims file. The insurance provider had reduced our premiums 3 years running because of the systems I'd built. They even mailed us a plaque last year. Craig posed with it in front of the main gantry like he was the one who wrote the SOP for confined space entry. And now he'd put that all at risk because the numbers looked good enough to gamble. I downloaded the full email thread, forwarded it to myself, made sure the termination letter from HR was attached for context. There was no anger in my movements, just precision. I even checked the metadata on the PDFs, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet. But I knew this much. Someone needed to remember the difference between cutting red tape and pulling out the pin on your own grenade. The cursor hovered over the checkbox for longer than I'd like to admit. "Are you the listed safety officer?" it asked, as if the past week hadn't been filled with evidence that yes, I still was, at least on paper. My name was on the filings, my credentials were tied to the permit chain, my signature sat at the bottom of every emergency protocol they still used, and Craig, in all his spreadsheet glory, hadn't even bothered to unhook me before bragging about the elimination of unnecessary overhead. So, yeah, I ticked it. But not before checking everything 3 more times. I reread the email thread, all 6 pages of it. His smug commentary, his bullet-pointed cost-saving initiatives, and that final line, "No more officer," as if that was a mark of innovation instead of reckless negligence. I attached the documents, his email, my termination letter, a time-stamped screenshot of the state's registry still listing me as active safety contact. I even included the org chart PDF he forgot to update, the one that had my name highlighted in yellow under compliance authority. Then I hit submit. No confirmation screen, no thank you message, just a quick reload of the main portal and a blinking message at the top that read, "Your submission has been received. Thank you." That was it. I closed the laptop, sat back, listened to the silence of my living room, which somehow felt louder than the molten core of Halden Steelworks ever had. There was no vindication, no movie score payoff. I didn't expect there to be. I wasn't even sure what would happen next, or if anything would happen at all. Maybe it would get buried under a pile of flagged reports. Maybe some desk analyst would skim it and move on. Or maybe, just maybe, it would land on the desk of someone who still believed that safety officer meant more than a line on an org chart. Because this wasn't just about me getting fired. It was about the lie Craig told after. The one that pretended a 12-year safety record built on protocols, audits, and real-time hazard mitigation could be swapped out for a laminated poster and a mandatory Tuesday meeting. He didn't just eliminate a role, he erased the one person who knew where the backup air canisters were stored, the one who documented every faulty railing weld, the one who fought tooth and nail to separate the acetylene tanks from the heat exchangers after that near miss in 19. And the moment he boasted about that erasure to the insurance company, the moment he made it official, in writing, with timestamps and zero foresight, he crossed a line I couldn't unsee. I didn't call anyone. Didn't forward it to the union or the foreman or the city inspector. I just sat with it, knowing full well that if nothing happened, I'd still done my part. And if something did happen, I wouldn't need to say a word. Craig had already done all the talking for me. It started with a message from Daryl, a former shift manager I hadn't heard from since the holiday potluck where Craig tried to deep fry a frozen turkey in the loading dock. "You hear about the emergency re-inspector drop-in," he wrote. Craig's face looked like curdled milk. I blinked at the text. Re-inspector. I hadn't expected a response, let alone a full on-site intervention. I figured my submission would get filed under disgruntled former staff and sit untouched in some underwriter's inbox. But apparently, someone over at Northern Underwriters had read it and escalated. The first whisper was about video logs. Then came the chemical storage request. Someone in logistics said the insurer had asked for full documentation on our emergency drills for the last 18 months. Times, attendance, procedures, follow-ups. I nearly choked on my tea when I heard that one. Our last full drill compliance record was 6 months old. And guess who had written it? Me. A week later, a friend in facilities forwarded me a voicemail recording. Craig, mid-rant, cursing about some ex-employee stirring up bureaucratic BS. Apparently, he'd stormed into morning briefing and accused the entire safety subcommittee, which, let's be honest, was just him and a laminated printout at that point, of inviting sabotage. The irony was choking. I didn't reply to Daryl's text. I didn't respond to the anonymous email from someone in admin asking, "Did you submit something?" I just let the current pull them along. The truth was, I wasn't rooting for anything. Not lawsuits, not firings, not some dramatic collapse. But I knew the scaffolding. I built most of it. And I knew exactly where the weight was starting to shift. It was little things first. A shipping hold placed on certain high-risk materials due to policy coverage review. Contractors asking about indemnification clauses before agreeing to sign new access badges. Word spread that a senior rep from the insurer had flown in and spent 4 hours in the control room reviewing CCTV angles. Craig hated two things: paperwork and oversight. Now he was drowning in both. And the thing about safety work is that it's invisible when done right. People only notice when it stops working, like when nobody could find the most recent fire evacuation maps because Craig had shredded the non-essential binders 2 weeks ago to make room for a new espresso machine. I could have warned him. I could have emailed, even anonymously, and said, "Update the permits, hire someone certified, take the audit seriously." But that's not how you treat someone you labeled dead weight. That's not how you treat someone whose only mistake was making your numbers look good without needing credit. So I stayed quiet, let the emails bounce between departments, let the re-inspectors ask their questions. Let Craig scramble through the procedural minefield he thought I'd just waltzed through for a paycheck. A structure can look solid from the outside right up until the bolts you ignored start to shear, and Halden Steel works. It had been humming on borrowed integrity for years. My systems held it together. Craig just never saw them. Now he would. Not because I wanted revenge, but because he left the scaffolding hollow. And gravity never needed my permission. It came in at 11:42 p.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, one of those messages that lights the screen just long enough to make you think twice about going back to sleep. I reached over, expecting another spam text about refinancing my non-existent student loans, but it was from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Eliza, one of the admin staff who used to sneak me lemon bars during audit week. No message, just an image attachment. I opened it. At first, it looked like a typical letterhead, Northern Underwriters in the upper left, their legal watermark in the background. Then I saw the subject line, "Formal notice of coverage termination, immediate." I sat up. Eliza had highlighted a paragraph in yellow. My eyes landed on the sentence that changed everything. "Thank you for confirming via internal correspondence that your facility no longer retains a qualified safety officer in violation of policy clause 4.7b. The quote that followed was damning, word for word. "We've eliminated our formal safety officer role. No more red tape, no more officer." Craig's email, the same one he'd proudly forwarded to the insurance reps like he was showing off a shiny new Tesla. I recognized the timestamp. I recognized the line spacing. I'd cleaned it up myself a dozen times when I still worked there. My termination letter had been the warm-up act. That email, that was the grand finale. He hadn't just pulled the trigger, he gift-wrapped the bullet and mailed it straight to the people who had every legal right to deny coverage. I read the line again. Slower this time, like it might somehow soften on a second pass. Effective immediately, your general liability, fire, and worker hazard policies are no longer in force. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion, only you already knew which beam snapped first, and it had your name on it. I set the phone down, got out of bed, poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and just let it settle. He did it to himself. No sabotage, no backdoor whispers, no carefully engineered revenge plan. Craig Halden had stepped on a rake in front of a legal department that took screenshots. And me, all I'd done was hand them the truth. I didn't even sharpen it, didn't frame it. I just let his own arrogance carry it to the top of their review pile, and now his signature was the exhibit. His email, his words, his timestamp. He'd tried to be clever, to save a buck, make a name for himself as a lean operator, a modernizer. And in doing so, he publicly acknowledged, documented even, that Halden Steelworks no longer had a certified safety officer on record. That alone violated 3 core clauses in the policy he probably never read past the premium amount. They didn't even need to investigate further. I imagined the board meeting, Craig pacing, legal trying to spin it, someone finally asking who sent the email, and Craig, in all his oblivious pride, raising a hand. No fury in me, just stillness. Like watching a kettle you turned off minutes ago stop hissing. That night, I slept like a stone. Not out of triumph, just gravity. The kind that takes hold when a burden you didn't ask for finally shifts to someone who thought it would never matter. Turns out, it mattered a lot. The news broke before sunrise. I was halfway through watering my succulents when the local station flashed an aerial shot of Halden Steelworks. North platform, red tape everywhere. A live chopper zoomed in on a collapsed crane arm bent like a broken rib across the scaffold supports. The reporter's voice was all urgency and scripted concern, following reports of a mechanical failure that sent 2 workers to the ER late yesterday evening. Both are in stable condition, but what's raising questions this morning, there was no certified safety officer listed at the time of the incident. No certified safety officer. There it was. Not buried in legalese, not buried in footnotes, front and center, 15 seconds into a local segment. I watched the screen in silence, the rim of my coffee cup cooling in my hands. The ticker at the bottom kept rolling. Northern Underwriters confirms no active policy in place for Halden Steelworks. Company may be held directly liable. I didn't even flinch. By noon, someone leaked the first lawsuit filing. One of the injured workers had retained a firm notorious for turning minor injuries into 7-figure settlements. The suit was clean, aggressive, and damning. Gross negligence due to operational failure in absence of certified oversight. I recognized the phrasing. It came straight from the safety clauses Craig had once called overkill. My phone lit up with messages. First Daryl, then Eliza, then a blur of names I hadn't seen since they'd cut the Christmas party budget and tried to spin it as a spirit of fiscal mindfulness. The one that made me stop and reread was from Ron, an old foreman who used to grumble about my inspection drills but always showed up early anyway. His message was one word: boom. No punctuation. Just that. And somehow it said everything. By 3:00 p.m., the company's LinkedIn page had turned off comments. Their last post, some puff piece about modernizing legacy operations, was getting ratioed into oblivion. I didn't read all the replies, but I caught one that said, "Modernization without safety is just demolition in slow motion." Harsh, but not wrong. Contractors began pulling out by evening. Vendors, too. Nobody wants to be within a 5-mile radius of a company blacklisted by both the press and its own insurer. One vendor I used to coordinate chemical supply with emailed me directly. "Do you have any idea who's in charge of safety now? We're getting no answers." I didn't respond. What was there to say? No one was in charge. That had been the problem from the start. Meanwhile, Craig stayed silent. At least in public, no press conference, No statement. Just a deafening absence that screamed louder than any denial ever could. But I imagined him pacing through his office, watching his inbox balloon with legal summonses, investor questions, and probably a few lines of pure panic from whoever was still manning PR. This wasn't revenge, it was consequence. And the difference mattered. I didn't cheer, didn't screenshot headlines for a victory scrapbook. I just folded the dish towel in my lap and went back to watering the last succulent, the one that always looked like it was dying but never actually did. Because I knew something Craig never understood. Neglect doesn't explode in a vacuum. It builds. Quietly. Until the weight of everything you've ignored decides it's done waiting. And when it lands, it doesn't ask for permission. He really thought he could flip it. A month after the accident, after the lawsuits, the vendor exodus, the mounting legal bills, Craig Halden dragged Northern underwriters into court, barking about bad faith, broken promises, and how no real company would cancel coverage over a single staffing change. His legal team came armed with 3-ring binders and buzzwords: operational discretion, temporary lapse, industry norms. They didn't make it past the first hearing. The insurer's attorney stood calmly as the court clerk finished the preliminaries. Then she walked up, placed a printed packet on the judge's bench, and flipped to a bookmarked section. She didn't raise her voice, just read it, word for word. Your Honor, the defendant confirmed the absence of a required safety officer via internal correspondence. Clause 4.7b of the liability agreement is explicit. Active designation and credentialing of a qualified officer is a non-waivable condition of coverage. She handed the packet over. Right there, on plain white paper, was Craig's original email, forwarded proudly, time-stamped, signed, and bragging like a man who thought regulations were optional if you typed them in bold. We've eliminated our formal safety officer role. No more red tape, no more officer. I didn't see the hearing, but someone in the back row did. A week later, a well-known safety watchdog blog published a post titled, "How to Lose Everything in One Paragraph." In the screenshot embedded at the top, Craig's email was shown full screen, my name still visible in the chain below his. Not as the sender, not as a threat, just there. A leftover signature block that said, Rebecca L. Merrow, Safety and Compliance Officer, Halden Steelworks. They'd circled it in red. No commentary, no caption. Just a scarlet loop around the name he erased in real life but accidentally left in the record that undid him. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, reading the post on my phone, engine still running. It felt strange being so central to something and yet so distant from the chaos. I wasn't in the courtroom. I hadn't leaked the email. I hadn't spoken to a single reporter. All I had done was submit a form and walk away. Craig tried to prove he was bigger than the rules, that he could bend them, bluff them, break them, because they were written by people like me, and people like me, he believed, were replaceable. But systems don't care about ego. Contracts don't care about charisma. And the rules? They don't care if you forward your own confession in high resolution. The judge didn't even blink, they said. Just glanced down at the printout, nodded once, and said, "Case dismissed." There's a kind of silence that follows finality. Not triumph, not outrage, just the sound of something closing, with nothing left to argue. Craig Halden had tried to blame the ladder he kicked out for the fall that followed, but no one reached to catch him, because the signature he'd erased from the payroll still echoed through every policy, every permit, every system that used to run, because someone like me cared enough to keep it standing. And that red circle? That wasn't just a signature. It was a tombstone for his arrogance. By the time the second round of audits started, the company line was operational restructuring. That was Craig's PR phrase anyway. Internally, they called it triage. OSHA had opened a file. The State Safety Bureau flagged 4 years of incomplete records. Environmental compliance had questions about the new storage location for coolant drums, which, I knew for a fact, sat directly under a corroded vent. Fines were coming, not hypotheticals, real numbers. 6 figures before legal even uncapped a pen. I read about it the same way everyone else did, through forwarded memos and hushed LinkedIn posts from ex-colleagues with updated titles and nervously vague job descriptions. There was no rally, no last stand, just a slow dissolve into departmental blame. Craig blamed HR for the mishandled offboarding. HR blamed legal for the unclear risk responsibilities. Legal blamed outdated protocols and rapid organizational change. It was like watching a group of people fumble a live grenade, everyone swearing it wasn't theirs. But nobody mentioned the woman who used to stand in the boiler hall with a clipboard and a highlighter, updating evacuation signage because the original map still showed a wall that had been knocked down in 2015. They didn't bring up my name, not in public, not in internal bulletins. It was like I'd never existed. And yet, the systems remembered. The regional compliance firm I'd quietly joined 6 weeks after my termination didn't care about Craig's version of events. They cared that my records were flawless, that my credentials hadn't lapsed, that I knew the difference between compliance and theater. My new office was small. My manager didn't make golf metaphors. I wasn't anyone's cost-saving casualty. I was the one they called when the smoke was already rising. One morning, a courier knocked on my door. No warning, no return address. The envelope was thick, official. Inside, a formal letter from Northern Underwriters. It was addressed to me. Thank you for your documentation and timely alert. We have completed our investigation. Formal enforcement has been enacted. Halden Steelworks' risk status has been updated across our active portfolio. No drama, no applause, just alignment. The kind of realignment that systems, especially the ones with deadlines and legal teeth, make quietly, once the noise has died down and the paperwork is finally in order. I folded the letter and filed it in my compliance folder under Resolved. I didn't post it, didn't forward it, didn't brag. There was no need. Because by then, Craig had already become a ghost in a system that used to tolerate him only because someone like me kept the gears oiled and the lights on. They thought deleting my position would make me disappear. But roles aren't what hold the line. People do, and once I was gone, the line moved. So did the consequences. I wasn't vengeful, just precise. The system remembered because it was designed to. I just reminded it where to look. The cafe was quiet, just the low hum of the fridge, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, and the sound of 18-wheelers hissing down the exit ramp outside. I sat in the corner booth, back to the wall, coffee in hand. It was that dull gray part of the afternoon when even the sunlight looked tired. My laptop was open, cursor blinking on a blank page. I'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, half thinking about nothing, half thinking about everything. That's when the phone buzzed. One line, sent by Daryl. Halden Steel shuts down Northern operations indefinitely. No punctuation, just finality. A photo followed. Rusted scaffold joints, yellow caution tape flapping in the wind. The whole frame sagged, like the building had finally exhaled and given up. I stared at it for a long time, not because it shocked me, but because it didn't. There were no press releases this time, no LinkedIn spin about strategic pivots or market consolidation. Just silence, punctuated by the hiss of a plant that forgot what held it up. I typed back. Guess safety wasn't optional after all. Didn't wait for a response. Just hit send, then archived the thread like I was sweeping dust off a shelf. The message flicked away into the digital attic, and I went back to the blinking cursor. The file I opened next was fresh. Title: Corporate Risk. Case number 017. Self-sabotage by ego. I didn't write much right then, just a few headers. But I already knew how it would go. A timeline of decisions, missed handoffs, critical roles erased for convenience, a chain of events that didn't unravel all at once, just stitch by stitch until nothing held. Craig had always called me the person who slowed things down. He used to say it like it was an insult, but all I ever did was ask, what if the thing you're skipping is the thing that saves someone's life? He never had time for that question. The rest. Stop waitress refilled my mug without asking. I nodded, said thank you, and looked back at the screen. I used to think justice came with sound. Gavel slams, shouting, closure, but now I know better. Sometimes justice is a line item. A silent shutdown, a blank space where a name used to be. He called me a cost. The system called me essential.